Being able to read in Japanese has always been one of my foremost goals with learning this language. And I am now living my best life, reading so many books in Japanese that I never thought I would get there in the first place. Now going on to 150 books read in Japanese, this is properly insane. But there was a time I was struggling a lot with my reading. In fact, I struggled for at least the first 2 years of my reading immersion in Japanese. And in today's video, we're going to cover which struggles I faced and how I overcame the obstacles of Japanese reading immersion in my first year reading books in Japanese. Today's video topics are going to be intensive versus extensive reading, how to not interrupt reading flow, getting past the lagging phase, and getting comfortable with Japanese kanji characters. So if these topics are topics that might interest you, keep on watching. So of course it goes without saying that, reading all these books was not an easy task at all. It was definitely a big challenge for me, and even after that year of reading immersion, that first year, I still felt like it was challenging to read anything in Japanese. So I definitely wasn't comfortable. And so in terms of what kind of obstacles I faced, which prevented me from feeling comfortable, there were mainly three. The comprehension level in general, so making sense of the language was essentially very difficult still at that time. Then we had the kanji specifically, so reading and understanding kanji characters was still a stretch for me. And then getting to a comfortable reading flow was also very difficult still. So really having a reading flow in the first place was still a challenge. It was not flowing, it was not fluid at any point in time during that first year really. So taking these obstacles one by one, I will now answer questions from you guys related to each of these, because of course you guys ask me questions about this, which I completely understand because that's definitely the most important and the most interesting. So the first question I will answer is, how much intensive and extensive reading did you do at the beginning? I mean, how many percent for each, or what percentages would you recommend? Especially as a beginner, intensive reading would make more sense study-wise, but it's always so time-consuming to look up every vocab and grammar structure I don't know. But on the other hand, when doing extensive reading, I only understand very little, especially when I choose books I want to read instead of graded readers for my level, which I don't enjoy that much. It's a real struggle for me because I always think I still have to learn more grammar and vocab before I can really start reading and avoid it for years now. A very interesting question. Thank you for your question, first of all, and thank you for also explaining what you are facing, which I also faced. When it concerns how much intensive and extensive reading I did at the beginning, I have put together a small recap for you guys so you can see per book what kind of reading method I used from book 1 to book 11. So for intensive reading, we're talking looking up every single word I don't know to try and understand 100% of the reading material. And when I used the extensive reading method, I only looked up a few words here and there to make sure I would broadly understand what was written, but not 100%. So I guess answering your question then, what percentage was this? I guess if you're really taking a close look, it was about 50-50. I used both reading methods quite equally, and I guess it really helped me with that sense of struggle that I had, because yes, I was struggling, and regardless of the reading method I was using, but I guess I was not struggling the same way. Using the intensive reading method, I was struggling with my reading flow because I would interrupt my reading pretty much at every sentence, and sometimes 2 or 3 times per sentence, because I would look up all the words I didn't know, and there were lots of words I didn't know at the time. But then I would not struggle understanding what I was reading because I was looking up everything I didn't know. And then using the extensive reading method, I was not struggling with my reading flow because I was not stopping as much to look up the words I didn't know. However, I was struggling with reading comprehension because I was not understanding, definitely not understanding 100% of what I was reading. So a good balance between these two reading methods, first of all, kept me engaged with what I was reading, also pushed me to finish every book I finished that year, because whenever I felt like finishing one particular book was starting to feel like this big thing, this big mountain, I then switched from one reading method to another. So mostly it was from intensive reading to extensive reading, to finish faster and to maybe not focus that much on my comprehension level. You know, if you're avoiding reading because you're thinking that you need more information, more knowledge first, and you need to study vocab and grammar first before you get to reading, I would tell you here to not avoid it and to instead do more of it than you think you should. That's definitely a tendency. I see this tendency to avoid doing immersion until you feel comfortable with the language. But here I want to simply tell you that you're not going to feel comfortable with the language unless you do immersion. And I know that starting your immersion journey with your target language early on does not feel comfortable at all and feels very much like a struggle at every instant. However, I think you do need to go through that phase. Even though it's painful, you need to go through it. You can also, of course, get there using study resources instead of immersion resources, but it will take you much longer. And for one, I am a very impatient person, so that's definitely not a route I can take with my target languages. I need to reach some kind of fluency fast, let's say. Otherwise, I get not bored, but I do get impatient. So that's my take on this. I hope it answers your question. How to avoid interrupting the reading flow every time a new character word appears. So I want to say that I use two things, especially at the beginning, two methods to get through this obstacle. So the first method I used was, again, we talk about this, but using a mix of intensive and extensive reading method. So doing that for a given resource, when you use the intensive reading method, you really want to do exactly that and interrupt the reading flow, because intensive reading is not about the reading flow, it's about full comprehension of what you're trying to read. So you will essentially have to interrupt the reading flow, and that's even how the method is applied anyway. So using the intensive reading method, there is no way to go around this. However, using the extensive reading method, so focusing only on what's important in a sentence or in a text and overlooking anything that does not seem crucial to understand the text, so reaching a general level of comprehension instead of a full level of comprehension, allows you to not interrupt the reading flow every single time you find something new. This is, of course, unless you are a very, very beginner at reading. So for example, when I read my first book in Japanese and when I started using the extensive reading method, I still needed to interrupt the reading flow as and when I felt like I should, because I was not even understanding the most crucial elements in the sentence, so I needed to look up the most crucial elements, you know what I mean? But then I still overlooked anything that was not crucial. So I guess what I'm saying is the more you will use the extensive reading method, the less you will interrupt your reading flow when you're using it. But then when you read in a target language, there is no answer to that question, in the sense that there is no way you can read without interrupting the reading flow until you can understand a full text in your target language by yourself. You just need to read a lot and you need to focus on the crucial things first, then move on to the rarer things and the things that are less crucial in a text, so that you improve your level of comprehension, you know, naturally. But you also need to make peace with the fact that using the extensive reading method, if you want to use it, you will have to overlook the parts that you don't understand, and you will have to make peace with the fact that you don't understand 100% of a text, or you sacrifice the reading flow. You have to choose. It's a balance. The second thing I would advise you to do if you're really struggling with, you know, the interruption of your reading flow every time you need to look up something, is to use the quickest tool possible for you to look up the words you're reading. So 2 things that I personally use. First thing is to look up the words I find while doing reading immersion. I pretty much only use the Yume dictionary app, and this app allows me to look up any word, any kanji in less than 30 seconds. One of the quickest way I can look up words, and that really only divert my attention from my reading flow for a few seconds. So that's the least interruptive method that I found. But above that, there is an even quicker way for you to look up the words you don't know without interrupting your reading flow that much, and it's to use ebooks, so digital resources or plain ebooks on your Amazon Kindle, for example. So using digital reading resources, you will be able to click on the words you don't know. Clicking on the words you don't know is much faster than looking them up on your own, whatever tool you use. So definitely this will help you not get out of your reading flow and then move on with the rest of your sentence. Those are 2 methods I used myself extensively in the past, and which I still use sometimes with my reading materials. Very interesting question again. Any tips on how to get past the lagging phase, as in you already know grammar and vocab and comprehend the language, but you see a wall of text and you kind of draw a blank and give up immediately? Heard this from many friends learning. It's tough to overcome. I definitely struggled with that for at least the first year of my reading immersion, and then for a good portion of my second year of reading immersion in Japanese. So it's definitely tough to overcome, I concur. And what really helped me there was, first of all, to read as much as I could, because reading volume was definitely helping me getting there faster, getting to, reading fluency without having this feeling of seeing a wall of text and being sort of scared to dive in. Definitely experienced some sort of fear. So what really helped me there was reading volume, but also a variety in my reading materials. So, variety of formats, novels, encyclopedia, books for kids, fiction, non-fiction, manga, all of that combined also helped me, because seeing the language written in different formats also helped me decipher it better and helped me get rid of that fear to read in Japanese, that, resistance I felt at the beginning. When I say at the beginning, really I insist this took me years to overcome. So really keep in mind that this is not something easy to overcome. It took me also a lot of active studying on the side, because my reading journey was of course complemented with a lot of active studying that I was doing on the side. So specifically for the JLPT, targeted at the JLPT exam, but not only, because I was also doing some other kind of studying, I guess. I was also doing my conversation practice at the time already. All of that combined really helped me to focus on grammar and understand as much as I could based on the active studying I would do for grammar, but also taught me that I didn't need to focus on understanding every vocab word always, because I knew from my reading immersion practice that this was not possible at that stage of my learning anyway. It was still early, so I guess I let go of this fear of not understanding all of the vocab words I would encounter, because I knew that this was not exactly possible anyway, so I let go of it. I just overlooked it, which really helped me also with the lagging phase. I knew I had this faith that I would acquire it naturally through immersion anyway. So my focus studying was really on grammar and not that much on vocab, and that really got me through it. And then, like I said, my experience is that even at the end of my first year of reading immersion, I was not past the lagging phase yet. Not at all. I do remember it. It took me, like I said, a good portion of 2021 after that to start feeling comfortable with any text in Japanese. How did you start getting comfortable with the kanji and all their readings? Thinking about this, I think there are 3 elements to my answer. The first one is my reading volume. I read as much as possible as soon as I could. So after finishing my first book, I was launched on my reading journey and I read as much as I could, right? So I think my reading volume increased the amount of natural repetition I would get from my reading immersion for any kanji really, and especially the ones that come up all the time and are the most common in the language. So by reading a lot, I increased the number of times I would get the same kanji, I would see the same kanji, and maybe I would look up the same kanji because I found it in the text and could not recognize it, for example. So by increasing the number of times I found any particular kanji in context, and then I looked up its meaning and its reading, all of that is repetition. And through this repetition, now looking back on it, I understand that what I did there was really natural acquisition of kanji characters, and not only their readings but also their meaning, of course. That's the first element. But then, for example, if I had not pushed myself to read without furigana on the kanji, I don't think I would have gotten that comfortable that quickly with kanji characters and their readings. I definitely improved my level there, starting to read without furigana. Of course, you're going to focus on the kanji and you're going to retain them better, because then you'll have to check all of the kanji characters that you don't remember how to read, and checking them is going to be so painful. At least that's how it worked for me. It's going to be so painful that you're going to want to remember them as soon as possible. Trust me, if you do it this way and if you force yourself to read without furigana, you'll definitely remember the reading. And then the third element, I would say, was doing a mix of intensive and extensive reading. So I was really focused on that too, because I knew that intensive reading was really helping me focus on each character, on their own. I needed to look up, if not all the kanji, at least the majority of them in one sentence to be able to make sense of the sentence. But at the same time, doing also extensive reading in one given sentence, understanding by myself without looking up anything, maybe 40 to 50% of that sentence, or up to 70% only. And then despite that, moving on to the next sentence was helping me focusing less on each kanji character one at a time and focusing more on the general meaning of things. I know that it's very tempting to want to understand 100% of what you read, 100% of the kanji characters, but I also want you to realize that actually not understanding everything but understanding most of what you read also has its own value, because then you're able to focus on what's important, and then you're focusing on the most important kanji characters, because here we're talking about kanji specifically, without being sort of polluted by the rarer kanji characters, which you don't need to remember at that point in time when you're still beginner or intermediate level, or the kanji characters that are not essential to the general comprehension of a text, of a book in general. So I feel like extensive reading gives you this permission to overlook the less important kanji characters and really focus on the ones that are important for you to grasp the general meaning of what you're reading. So to recap, how did I start getting comfortable with kanji characters and their readings? I deliberately forced myself to read without furigana. I deliberately read as much as I could, so my reading volume, and I deliberately used a mix of intensive reading and extensive reading method. That will be it for today, guys. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope it was insightful. As always, if you've got more questions, please leave them down below. Also, I remind you guys that this video is actually the 4th in my Reading in Japanese video series. As for me, I will see you in my next video. Bye bye! Mata ne!